welcome to Unite, the first global pride, especially for and by young LGBTQI people. This is Ruben Avila. I work in the policy and research team of IGLIO, and today I'm super excited to be introducing this panel on queer fat activism. To be honest, so far at IGLIO, we haven't done much work on this topic, and we thought that the global pride was kind of a great opportunity to get us thinking about fat identities and activisms, and also how to build up and strengthen queer youth life affirming experiences for all of us. So obviously fat shaming and fat phobia is kind of a weapon that has a particular impact on young people. So I'm sure that this discussion about queer fat activism will help us rethink social change and how to create more liberating living possibilities within our own communities. We have a great group of people here, a great group of activists that will bring kind of an intersectional and feminist sensitivity to this discussion, and also will help us kind of think how fat phobia is linked with ableism, racism, or sexism. So thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for being here with us today. As I said, at IGLIO, we're very happy to be able to hold this panel, but we also know that we didn't do much work on this yet. So for us, this is just kind of an initial step and a first conversation to learn more about it. This session, has been fully organized by Bella Fitzpatrick. She's the director, she's the director of Shout Out, one of our member organizations working in the island of Ireland for the inclusion of LGBTQI people by providing educational programs. So Bella is a staunchly bisexual fat foodie who has worked on LGBTQI education in schools, workplaces, and government bodies. And she has worked with Outright Action International in New York, advocating for LGBTQI rights at the UN level. So really many, many thanks, Bella, for organizing this. You put everything together, you've invited everyone, and you're gonna be moderating this. So really thank you very much for letting us learn more about this topic together with you. So.
Thank you so much, Ruben, and for all your help. They've been amazing. I'm just going to introduce myself first. My name is Bella Fitzpatrick. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the director of Shout Out, a small organization here on the island of Ireland. We work in 32 counties on the island, both of the 26 counties of the Republic of Ireland and the 6 counties of Northern Ireland. So we're technically international, but on the same bit of the island. I came to fat activism by living actually briefly, very briefly, in a not fat body. So I've always been fat, small fat probably. And I really, for a long time, didn't think I got discriminated against. You know, I thought, well, stores don't carry my size, but why would they? And then I thought, you know, sure, sometimes people yell at me on the street, but, you know, everyone gets that. And then I lost a significant amount of weight due to being extremely sad and depressed and no longer getting the enjoyment out of food, which is not something I would ever trade for being thin. And I suddenly entered the world, the blessed world of being someone with a body that was more accepted by society. And that's when I realized I had been treated really rubbish by everybody else, because I was then being treated really nice, and it was very, very illuminating for me. So I was actually radicalized by the kind words, not the mean words. So every time someone said to me, now you look amazing, and you must be so happy, and you know, all these doors started opening for me. It kind of opened my eyes to what was happening to me personally, but then that led to me realizing the systematic oppression for fat people and people living in any sort of marginalized body. And it's become apparent in the way that it intersects with my queer activism that the queer community is not a fat positive place. It's not a place that has been in any way sheltered from mainstream fat phobia. It's in some places it's actually more concentrated than in the mainstream. And I really came to this idea of coming out as fat, which I had to do after I obviously regained the weight, because that's what bodies do. Bodies hate losing weight. They're not designed to do it. So I regained all the weight. I'm now very happy in my fat body. And I had to come out to my friends and family as a fat person. I had to say, like, no, I am a fat person. I'm not a temporarily large person in the, about to become skinny. I am actually fat and I will always be fat. And, you're just going to have to be okay with that. And they took it way worse than me coming out as bisexual, like way, way worse. And that, again, led me to believe and to realize kind of the stigma towards being fat. So I would love to hear from each of you on the panel. I'm just going to go by who's in my little Brady Bunch boxes first, and maybe hear a little bit about you and your work and anything you'd like to say before we kick off. So I'm going to start with Jess.
All right, great, bonjour. My name is Jess Merwin. I'm a mixed race Mi'kmaq artist, educator, activist, curator, slash, sort of. It's really, I find it really hard to sort of pin down what I do into one specific sort of job description, because so much of my work is influenced by activism. You know, everything that I do is really in this effort to be rooted in my community and to be serving my community. So that ends up meaning that, you know, sometimes you're like, cool, I'll mentor somebody. And sometimes that means I'll organize this screening or this event, or, you know, sometimes it means I'm gonna drive your grandmother to the grocery store, you know, like just as much as, you know, possible, sort of rooting in what I do and what can be a community good. I'm originally from Canada's East Coast, but now I live in Montreal. And something I've been really passionate about is using social media as in service to activism and to like community art. Especially in this time of pandemic, it's become really evident to me that some of the only ways that we can continue to have contact, continue to have meaningful engagement with people is via social media. And especially because some of the youth that I work with in Indigenous communities, you know, are very isolated. They're like in Northern Canada, you know, so they're not able to, you know, leave their little community. And so like their way of connecting to the world is through Instagram and Snapchat and Facebook. So yeah, really using that as a tool to connect and to do activism has been a big part of what I've been working on lately. I am a super fat, or what was it that my friend said the other day, majestically fat, which I just think is wonderful, as a wonderful way of thinking about it. I've always been fat, and it's one of those things that I'm very similar to you, Bella. You know, at the smallest point in my life, it was because I was at my most extreme eating disorder behaviors, and I was still fat, and people were like, yeah, it'd still be really nice if you like lost some weight. And I was like, I haven't eaten anything in 3 days, you know? So that also, I think, informs a lot of my militancy, perhaps, in how I talk about bodies and sort of like where I draw the lines. You know, I'm not here to talk about body positivity, especially as a trans person. I, you know, at best have a fraught, you know, relationship with my body a lot of the time. It's always going to be complicated. So, you know, I am here to talk about fat positivity. I am here to talk about the ways that diet culture impacts us at every stage. And again, like specifically looking at Indigenous communities and the way that eugenics and racism and colonialism have really played out and influenced how Indigenous, especially Indigenous fat bodies are viewed. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm so excited to speak with everybody on this panel, to talk about different things. I'm familiar a little bit with Maya's work, and I'm also familiar with Charlotte's work, so this was a huge honor to be asked to talk today.
Thank you so much, Jess. We're delighted to have you. Next, I'd love to, Charlotte, for you to introduce yourself.
Hi, hello. Oh, I'm ever so nervous. My hands are really sweating and. Huh. Okay, so my name is Charlotte Cooper, and I am a working class dyke. I live in East London. I'm old, so it's a bit strange to be doing something that's orientated towards younger people, but I'm in deep middle age and perimenopausal and hot flushing like nobody's business. What can I tell you about myself? I'm no longer an academic, but I have a long history in the academy. And my day job, I work as a psychotherapist. I have my own practice. I tend to work with people who are sort of on the margins or on the edges in some way. I work with a lot of fat people, with neurodivergent people, with queer and trans and non-binary people, and with sex workers. They tend to be my core people that I work with. Yeah, I also make stuff. So I'm a live artist. My practice encompasses, well, I guess my sort of root is in zine making and DIY culture. But I also perform, and yeah, dance is, I guess, one of my main things that I do these days. My work, I've been working on fat for a really long time. I wrote this book in 1998 called Fat and Proud, The Politics of Size, which theorizes the social model of disability and fat. And it was based on, I did a master's degree. And then I also wrote this book, which is called Fat Activism, A Radical Social Movement, which uses, I guess, more kind of interest in queering fat activism. I'm a feminist, and I'm one of the people that helped to establish fat studies as a kind of a mode of inquiry into fat. Pronouns are she and they. Size 8 feet. I don't know. What else you want to know about me? I mean, I can talk more about fat activism in a little bit, but I don't know what else to say about myself. Yeah, maybe I'll just leave it at that.
I also have size 8 feet. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Charlotte. And we're looking forward to getting your take on fat activism shortly. Maya, I'd love you to introduce yourself now.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Maya Fino. I use they, them pronouns. I identify as a mid-fat, going on super fat, Black, queer, non-binary person. Currently based on occupied Lenape land, but also known as Brooklyn, New York. The work I do identify as a cultural worker broadly, but I write, I do human rights advocacy work, I organize primarily around police and prison abolition, queer Black feminism, and just Black liberation broadly. But I'm working now on trying to look deeper into the intersections between fatness and Blackness. Sometimes I model, sometimes I critique fashion, but I'm much less interested in talking about body positivity and more so looking at fat liberation as a whole and divesting from the idea of beauty or what a good fat is. I think that's mainly it. I hope that works. But I'm so excited to be on this panel with you all and to really delve into fatness and queerness with you folks.
Great, thank you so much, Maya. And next up is Sam, also known as my buddy Sam. Hi, Sam.
Hi, everyone. Wow, this panel is absolutely amazing. I'm so honored to be asked and absolutely just I'm blown away by all of your experience. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you all. This is going to be great. So a little bit about me. I'm an activist, I'm an author, I'm a copywriter by day, and I'm everything else by night. So I met Bella through writing a blog. Well, I knew Bella beforehand due to her work with Shout Out, but we got to talking about fat activism through a blog that I write about people's favorite foods and their experiences with food, which is a little bit lapsed now, partly because of just me being a little bit lazy, but also because there is a pandemic. So I'm a cook, I'm a wannabe chef. I, kind of circumnavigated my passion for food because I'm obsessed with it to get an air quotes real job through college. So as part of my my activist work, I helped to organise Ireland's first alternative Pride last year, which was attempting to create a space for people who don't fit in with traditional Pride narratives, and that includes fat people, sex workers, working class people, and people who aren't white, settled, and Irish. And I believe in what Jess was saying. I believe in like radical kindness and just ensuring that you're putting your best self out into the world and trying to help as much as possible where you can, because it starts with community, and that's where we should be focusing all of our energies if we have them to give. So obviously I'm originally from the UK. I came to Ireland when I was 12, and I found out very quickly that I was both fat and gay and incredibly British, in an Irish Catholic boys' school, which, as you can imagine, not a great time. So it's a bit of a different one. And then, a lot of, my weight has ballooned up and down over the course of years. And I found, particularly being a cis gay man, that like stocks, my value changes with my size. It's very evident of the way that you're treated when you go particularly into gay male spaces, how your size affects how you're perceived and how you're greeted in those spaces as well. I have a little bit of a crisis of identity, especially coming on here when Bella asked me, because I still struggle with labeling myself as being fat. It's something that I am, I feel that weird fear of it. But coming on here, it's a journey of acceptance for me, and acceptance towards my body and loving my body more and more every single day. It's really hard to push through it, but I think this is going to be a really good step for me and hopefully for everyone listening, in terms of getting that acceptance and reaching that goal of fat liberation as well.
Thank you so much, Sam. I knew I wanted to invite Sam as someone who is still on a journey of fat liberation, that we sometimes call baby fats in the community. But also, I knew you wouldn't mind being our token cis man. And I do think it's important to talk about that particular culture, which is so virulently fatphobic, as well as talking about other issues. I also just wanted to do a little translation, because we have such an international panel when Sam says settled. In Ireland, we have an ethnic minority group known as travellers, who have been aggressively marginalised by what are called settled people in Ireland. So those are people who are not part of the traveller community. I did want to get someone from the travelling community onto this panel, because I also know that that community can be very fatphobic. I was unable to get anybody because they're extremely busy ensuring the health of their community, because they tend to live in very close quarters and the government does not give a single shit about them. Oh, sorry, am I allowed to swear? Anyway, I already did. So in case you were just wondering that context, and just anybody listening to just learn a little bit about other forms of Indigenous people, even in the white sphere. So what I would like to do now is hand over to Charlotte to contextualize a little bit what we're talking about when we talk about fat activism. Hopefully many of you listening to this don't know what that means, because that would be great, because you will learn, and why we keep on saying that we're not talking about body positivity as a separate thing to fat liberation. So Charlotte, take it away.
Hi, okay, so I'm firstly going to say that I think fat activism can be absolutely anything, which is a bit of a weird thing to say, because people have an idea that fat activism is particular kinds of acts. But my doctoral research, which I finished in 2012, and which formed the basis of this most recent book, I sort of wondered what people meant when they talked about fat activism, and actually it really can be anything. So an idea of activism is usually stuff to do with what we call political process, which is about changing the law or changing policy, but there are many, many ways of doing activism, and that's not the only one. And I start with talking about fat activism rather than fat phobia. Fat phobia is one part of how people of all sizes experience the world, but I think fat is about a lot of things and not just depression. And I think it's really, really important to remember not just the good things about fat, but the complexity of it. and I'm especially interested in fat culture and history and activism. And again, the idea of fat culture is a bit of a weird one, because fat people aren't, in mainstream culture, aren't really expected to have any culture, or expected to be, you know, to even have a voice, or to have a take, or to think about fat. So yeah, it often takes people a bit of time to get used to the idea that there is such a thing as fat culture, or community even. But there is, and we're proof of that today. And I guess what I want to talk about, yes, so there are many roots of fat activism, and I don't think one is any better than another. So it's the multiplicity of it that really interests me. So fat activism has come out of sex scenes, it's come out of bear culture, for example, it's come out of fashion, it's come from lots of different roots, but the one that interests me the most is its feminist roots. And fat activism is influenced by the times and the times that it's in. It's always sort of contextualized. So the technologies that it's in, and also the times and the ideas that are circulating, the social ideas that are circulating. So it does change over time because it reflects the times that it's in. But I'm particularly interested in a thread of fat activism that began with a bunch of Jewish lesbians on the west coast of the US in the early 70s and in the late 60s. And these were women who were really active in anti-racism and civil rights activism. And they were also part of this thing called the radical therapy movement, which was an idea about politicizing therapy. So thinking about people's problems as having social reasons. And one of the main groups that kind of established this thread of fat activism that I'm so interested in was called the Fat Underground. Now, they produced a manifesto. They're a really amazing bunch of people, and they produced a manifesto which you can get. This book it's called Shadow on a Tightrope: Writings by Women on Fat Oppression. It came out in 1983. The Fat Underground had disintegrated by then, but they produced lots of writings, and some of the writings are published in this book alongside with contemporary writing as well from the 80s. And this is a book that really politicized me. When I was young, I didn't really know that libraries existed, and I didn't have any money. So what I'd do, I'd go to bookshops. And at that time, there was a network of feminist bookshops. And I would go into the feminist bookshops. I was particularly interested in sex. So I'd go to the shelves about sex. And lo and behold, next door to the shelves about sex were books about bodies and I guess health. And anyway, there was, this is where I found that book. So I'd stand and read it in a bookshop instead of getting it from a library or having my own copy. And at the moment, I'm just flicking through it because there's something that they published in this book, which is really brilliant. I'm not going to read it all out. Here we go. So Judy Freespirit and Ol Deberan, who were two founders of the Fat Underground, wrote a Fat Liberation Manifesto. It's got 7 points, and they talk about sort of the intersectionality of fat. This was published in 1973, and they talk about the diet industry, and they also talk about socialism as well. I think it's a really magnificent piece of writing, and still so contemporary. I think it's amazing that it's that they wrote it for a start, and also yeah, still has an enormous amount of relevance today. So these lesbians, these old lesbians, they created a set of ideas around fat, and they were also influenced by this other book as well. Look, I'm holding lots of books up today, but this book called Fat Power by somebody called Llewellyn Louderback. This was published in 1970, I think, or 67. Anyway, published a long time ago, and this was a book that that one of the first books that thought about fat as a political subject. Lou wasn't a feminist, but these other women were, and so they created a feminist sort of take on fat politics. And so this was about the personal being political, about placing your experience in a broader social context. So one of the things they said is that fat people's problems are not about health, but they're political problems. They did non-hierarchical organising. They were creative. So they did kind of quite performative interventions. A lot of the work they did was about talking and sharing. They published stuff, did public speaking. They were, I mean, for a group that was so short-lived, they were phenomenally powerful and successful. And they moved elsewhere through networks that existed at the time, for example, through bookshops and feminist publishing. So this is what I mean when I'm talking about the technologies of the time influence the kinds of activism that happen. And their ideas traveled. They traveled through the States, they traveled internationally, and they traveled to me in 1989 in Aberystwyth, which is a very small seaside town in Wales, where I was living at the time, which I think is pretty amazing, that these ideas that started in Los Angeles in the sort of late 60s could reach me over the course of 10 years. Yeah, so those are the roots of the fat activisms that I'm interested in. I would say beware with some of these ideas, because these were lesbians who were doing their work at a time when, for example, lesbian separatism was a popular, well, was it ever popular? I don't know if it was popular, but it was around. And there were also sort of threads of transphobia and anti-porn, anti-sex work in that, I'm sorry, excuse my academic jargon, but in that discourse. I don't recall much of it particularly in this book, or any of it really, but it's part of the world that these ideas emerge from. So I would really encourage people to read critically and carefully to avoid reproducing those things. Nevertheless, I think it's important not to throw out the baby with the bathwater, and really important to think about the roots of these ideas and how they've travelled and how they influence us. I mean, it was amazing to hear earlier that, you know, the organisation hasn't done much work on this yet. To my mind, nobody's done any work on it yet. It's completely fringe discourse. But so it's amazing that this panel exists and that we're talking about it, and that, you know, ideas around fat community or coming out as fat, which is one of the things I theorised in 1998. Now, you know, people are talking about people I've never met before. So these ideas do travel, and that's encouraging. How fat looks now, so I identified how fat activism looked in my research. So yeah, we've got political process type of activism, and also kind of satellite activisms to that, which are around administering and organising that kind of activism. There's also community building, creative forms of fat activism as well. There's a lot of performance going on. There's also these things that I identified, which is micro-activism. So these are forms of activism where you don't really have to be part of a group, or you don't have to do anything like big. It can be things like, I don't know, wearing a short sleeve, or eating an ice cream, or, you know, very, very little thing, reading a book. That's what I think of as micro-activism. And then there's also ambiguous activism. I've got to say that fat activism sometimes fails, often fails actually. And there can be, I don't know, forms of activism that you can't quite put your finger on. And I'm especially interested in that kind of stuff. And as a live artist, it's the weird stuff that particularly thrills me and excites me. So things that are sort of illegible and a bit slippery and odd, that's where you'll find me. I've got to say that I don't really distinguish between body positivity and fat activism particularly. I noticed lately people are very upset about it and try and distinguish between one and another, but I'm not really a border police kind of person. I would say, I mean, one of the things I write about is the way that body positivity at the time of writing had become a sort of a proxy for fat activism. And I wanted to say, actually, it's more than that. It's not just about that. But I guess I've sort of lost touch with what body positivity even means now. It seems to be the thing that nobody likes very much and that everybody is sort of trying to avoid being. But yeah, I would be sort of cautious about that sort of dismissal, because I've seen that in earlier iterations of the movement as well. So for example, there's been a lot of sort of fractiousness between sort of the feminist activists and also the BBW contingent, who are sort of fat straight women, as sort of like a sex scene. And I think that sort of divide and conquer really doesn't help anybody. So what else do I want to say? Oh, I guess I just want to sort of reiterate that I think of the movement as being extremely diverse. It has a lot of aims. Sometimes people ask me what it's for, and I think it can be for anything, really. I think of fat as being a kind of a lens, a way of experiencing and understanding things. Sometimes these forms of activism are contradictory. There are tensions between whether or not to assimilate, or the tensions around consumerism. There are certainly tensions around professionalism with health at every side, who gets to speak, standpoint, that kind of stuff. But I'm not really sure. I'm cautious, and I'd be critical of activisms that reproduce other oppressive status quos. But in general, I think these different forms of activisms and these different threads are not better or worse than each other. And although the radical hopes of early fat feminists haven't really come to pass, there's lots of ignorance and amnesia, and this intergenerational transmission where we could all do a lot better with that. I still think it's incredible that we're even having this conversation. This would be completely beyond my young self to imagine that something like this would happen. And the movement is so much bigger than it used to be. Yeah, so some things have changed, some things are crap. The current war on obesity as a response to Corona is a total shit show in every way. But I also think there's a lot of hope and a lot to be glad and happy and excited about as well. And as for, being on a journey, well, I can't speak for everybody else, but I do think of fat as being a lifelong a special interest in me. I kind of dip in and out of it. Sometimes I get a bit burnt out and withdraw for a bit, but I always come back because it's a really compelling and interesting subject. And whether or not you feel all right about your body, well, hopefully you find ways to live in the world. And I think activism can be a way of creating livable lives. Things can be very hard as well. And I'd really encourage people to go gently on themselves. Yeah, I think that's kind of all I want to say. But to sort of imagine, what activism could be, where we want to take it, that it can go in any direction. Yeah, that's me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Charlotte. I really appreciate putting some historical aspect on the discussion we're having today. I know for me, I assumed wrongly that there was just no fat pride, fat liberation movement, and to know that it went back all the way to the 60s and that there was a fat manifesto and that it still rings true today, and that this was organized by dykes, by Jewish lesbians, by Black women, which is so a million miles away from, I guess, what we're kind of seeing on the Instagram of it all, which is a woman who's thin, who's slightly bent over, so she has like one ripple and she's like, oh, my body. And I guess that's where we're kind of looking at that as a spectrum and trying to see who built this platform and now who's standing on top of it. And that's the thing we need to be clear of.
Yes, I'd just like to add a little bit to that. I mean, I think there's a great problem with gentrification of these ideas too, and that what gentrification does, it obliterates the radical stuff that was there before. So yeah, I suspect that might be something of what you're talking about. Anyway, I'm going to mute myself now.
No, absolutely. I'm going to start talking about some kind of big issues, and I want to talk a little bit about social and medicalized fat phobia and how much it is rooted in racism. I mean, even something like BMI was invented by a racist mathematician. It had nothing to do with individuals. That same mathematician went on to positive criminology, which would, basically say that Black people were criminals. And it's been used recently by, particularly in the COVID pandemic, to kind of blame fat Black people for dying, despite the fact that being due to lack of protection, social protection. And even something like, I saw that the NYPD lawyers were saying that Eric Garner would have died anyway because he was obese. And I know that obviously hurt me and impacted me, but not in any sort of a way that it would for someone in the Black community, and particularly in the fat Black community. So I would like to ask Maya, could you speak a little bit to the intersection of racism, fat phobia, and kind of what that looks like?
Yeah, to me, fundamentally, I can't talk about my fatness without talking about my Blackness, my queerness, other parts of me. And I really appreciate you bringing up the Eric Gardner example. I think to me, it's very clear and very stark the ways in which when Black people, Blackness is already criminalized. And that's like fundamentally like from like 1492. And so often fat Black people, our fatness is used as a justification for our state-sanctioned death. Like by COVID, it's like, okay, well, you're fat, like you deserve to die. Or like in the case of Eric Gardner, it's like you were already marked by death, and it takes the responsibility away from the cop's chokehold that actually killed him. I think for me, a lot of my understanding or framework comes from Dr. Sabrina String's books, Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia. And that to me forces us to really think about colonialism and the ways in which like the British, the French, the Germans, those who went to the global South to conquer and subjugate Black, Indigenous, and other people of color based in the global South, used systems of oppression like fat phobia, and I also think ableism. Those to me are like the two pillars in which to like mark Black, Indigenous, and like other people of color's bodies as one undesirable deviant, but also to say you're fat, like you don't have the discipline, you don't have the ability to govern yourself, I'm gonna colonize you. And it also allows for white people, I'm talking mainly about like white people who colonized, so the British, the French, it's able to like create this phenotype, this idea, this physical physique in which you can say, okay, these people are different from us, therefore we can like sort of clear our conscience of the judgment or like the fear of like colonizing these people, and the ways in which I think specifically to create these people and like craft them to be subhuman. And it makes it easier for you to enact violence, enact genocide, enact slavery upon these people when you craft them as being subhuman and say like, their fatness is a marker for that, or like disability is a marker for that. Those are just some of my initial thoughts about the ways in which fatness and like racism intersect.
Thank you so much. And I know it's obviously a difficult thing to talk about because it's rooted in so much intergenerational trauma, but also personal trauma. We, in my work in Shout Out, we talk about colonialism a lot in terms of, homophobia and transphobia. So in Ireland is a former colony of the UK, of Britain. We gained independence in the 30s. We still have a lot of hangovers from being a colony. What I find interesting is you look at something like, say, criminalization of homosexuality around the world, and we decriminalized homosexuality in 1993. Botswana decriminalized just last year. The law that Botswana overturned is the exact same law that we overturned. It's a British era colonial law. And the way in which Britain's major export is racism. Like that is what Britain exports around the world via the channel that is colonialism. And I think there's a real tempting way to think of queer liberation as a Western ideal. And if we look towards, say, India, India decriminalized homosexuality a couple of years ago, again, overturning a British era law. That is not India joining the West, that is India becoming more India and decolonizing itself. So I think it's really important to talk about colonialism in queerphobia, but also in fatphobia.
Bella, if I may just jump in a little bit on colonialism, that's, one of those things that I do like to talk about a lot, especially considering, sort of my own experience, considering the experiences of people that I care about, and also considering the history. When you talk about Britain exporting, racism around the world and sort of like this white supremacy essentially around the world, Canada is another prime example of that. For us, a lot of the fixation on bodies and on the way bodies should be and should appear really comes out of periods in our history where there has been distinct political strife between white settlers and either indigenous people or other non-white like groups that are coming in. You know, we had a large population influx of Black loyalists after the American Revolution. So, you know, these were a lot of times formerly enslaved people who then immigrated north as part of an agreement with Britain. If they fought on the side of Britain, they were to be given land in Canada to resettle. That didn't work out. The first race riot actually in North America happened in a small town in Nova Scotia because of that. And again, you know, you saw a lot of this policing of bodies very specifically. And, you know, we still face a lot of that in Indigenous communities here in Canada. There is still very much a paternalistic view of the health of Indigenous people because it's sort of looked at, you know, because of high rates of things like diabetes, high rates of, you know, what people would describe as non-normative bodies, so like disability, fatness, you know, the government sort of takes that still to this day as a cue to sort of be like, okay, well, we're going to send you some pamphlets on proper nutrition, and you know, we're going to, you know, set up like a diabetes clinic, and we're going to do this and that. But they're still not interested in the fact that many reserves in Canada are facing housing crisis. They don't have proper support in terms of infrastructure. They don't necessarily have proper support in terms of youth facilities and schooling or elder care. They still don't have necessarily like access to proper medical facilities. They are subject to high rates of environmental racism. You know, but the government is very concerned about the fact that, you know, Indigenous people are fat or Indigenous people have diabetes, but they don't want to address any of the social factors that are, you know, part of that. And again, like so much of this comes so directly from colonialism. It's sort of like, well, you're still a ward of the state, you know, we still have to look after you. You know, that I want people to interrogate that mode of thinking a lot more. You know, one of the things that we hear about so often in Canada is, you know, especially with white people and non-Indigenous settlers, like, is, oh, well, you know, we didn't learn about this in school. We didn't learn about Black and Brown and Indigenous communities in school. And it's like, yeah, that's a very intentional thing, you know, that maintains the white supremacy that sort of exists across the board, that maintains colonialism across the board. So I think some of the work that we do, and in terms of interrogating treatments of Black and Brown and Indigenous bodies and how we treat, you know, fat bodies, also has to do with sort of like decolonizing just in general. Like it's learning exactly how all these mechanisms and systems have been put into place to support this very specific ideology. You know, and so it is a larger project that we kind of have to pick apart, you know?
Absolutely. And I think this just goes to show that what do you talk about when you talk about fat? You talk about everything, like everything stems from it, and it's really important. Maya, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I wanted to speak a bit more to fatness and racism and the way they intersect. I think it's really important to emphasize that because Black and Brown Indigenous people never fit into like white colonial Eurocentric body standards, the consequences are very dire. And I think that in addition to Eric Gardner, I think about the ways in which Black people who are often murdered by agents of the state, like police officers, the description of them is often like, they're big, they're scary, like they're hulking figures that like we had to just take down. So I really want to like emphasize that like for Black and Brown Indigenous people, fatness really just enhances marginalization. It pushes you even further to a margin, even further to the margins, even further away from these beauty standards. And these are like very deadly consequences, both in terms of like getting directly murdered, but sanctioned by the state, but also like through hell, like pandemics, getting your fatness and your like Blackness, your indigeneity used as a justification for your death, and to explain away any responsibility that the state has in like your death and like your marginalization from birth, basically.
And I was going to say, Maya, too, one thing that I know has come up here in Canada a lot, and I imagine it's similar in the States, is we have such high rates of mortality among Black and Indigenous mothers.
Absolutely.
For entirely preventable things. And often, again, this is specifically a way that Black and brown bodies are weaponized against the people who live in those bodies, because, you know, doctors will sort of say, well, you know, this woman died due to complications of childbirth, but she was obese. And it's like, all right, well, how come that's not that, you know, how come this is just a phenomenon that's impacting our communities, even though, you know, we're a minority portion of like the population, you know, how come it's disproportionately affecting us? Yeah, it's like you said, it's dire consequences. It's not just like oh, it's not great that I can't buy pants anywhere that fit me, you know? And I think that, just to come back to something that Charlotte's saying, like, I think that for me is why I don't talk about body positivity, but I really do focus on, you know, fat positivity or fat liberation, is because I think body positivity, like you said, is, you know, has been gentrified to the point where it's kind of lost its claws. It's kind of been defanged, you know? It's sort of like, oh, you know, body positivity, it's about self-esteem, you know, and don't get me wrong, I want people to feel good about themselves, and I want people to be able to engage in those discourses. And especially when I'm working with young people, I do start from a place of body positivity because I do think that is more accessible to a lot of folks. But I would say for me personally, because there are such huge stakes, you know, and this is not even sort of talking about transphobia in terms of fatness. I don't know what your experience has been, but I am in the process of searching for a new family doctor here. And a big reason why I had to leave my previous family doctor is because regardless of what I went in for, she was only interested in talking to me about weight loss surgery. And as a trans person, my body is very medicalized, you know, like I have to have like 3 doctor's letters in order to have top surgery. And it's impossible to obtain those letters when you know, when you don't have a family doctor who is willing to see beyond your fatness. So I would go into my family doctor saying like, okay, I want to get top surgery. I need the letter from you to, you know, along with all these other letters and forms that we have to fill in order to even get a consultation. And she'd sort of be like, well, I will fill this in for you, but I really think you need gastric bypass surgery first. And that went on for 2 years, to the point where you know, my life is sort of put on hold in this way, you know, until, you know, I can sort of like meet this bar that you know, this medical professional has set, you know, and so I finally said, you know, I'm going to find a new family doctor, but that doesn't mean that I've solved that problem, so to speak. Like, that just means that now I don't have a family doctor, so all of the chronic like illness stuff and all the trans stuff ends up kind of getting shuffled back to the back burner, because now I have to actually look for a family doctor again. And you know, I have Indigenous friends and Black friends who won't go to the doctor without a white friend with them, because they know that they will not be believed by a doctor, especially a white doctor, especially a male doctor. I'm fortunate in the sense that I am white passing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that I don't experience some of the persistent and constant sort of like, well, have you thought about losing weight? It's like, I just came in because I'm having a allergic reaction to this medication I'm taking. Like, it has nothing to do with my weight. Yeah, so yeah, the consequences are really serious. And I think sometimes that kind of gets lost in a lot of contemporary body positivity discourse.
Thank you for sharing, Jess. I mean, you said that you know, you don't meet a certain bar, a bar set by a racist mathematician that was never meant for individual use. It's really frustrating. I'm going to just switch around one of the talking points because we are talking about medical stuff at the moment, and I just think it feeds in better. I'm particularly interested in intersex rights, and if you go to intersex rights, you go to the heart of dysfunction in terms of things like around binary gender system, gender roles, bioessentialism. You go to the limits of all of that. You go to the core. And in my work as an LGBT educator, it's one of the least known of our alphabet, of our acronym. And yet, when you start talking about it, people are like, "Oh, I do know what you're talking about." It's in there. They've had a cousin, they've known a person, because it's 1.7% of the population. It is not a very small group. And I think if you know a lot about intersex rights, then nothing is shocking about how dysfunctional the medical system is. Nothing, because intersex people are still having intersex genital mutilation happening to them. And it is such a core part of the narrative for LGBT people, and for Black people and for fat people to be mistreated by the medical system, be that with HIV and lack of access to PrEP. I know, Sam, you would know more about kind of PrEP access here in Ireland. We've just got it, sort of. But yet, we still have gay men who've been mistreated by doctors over needing PrEP, and we have trans people being mistreated, obviously by the medical system over and over. And yet we can't seem to come together and compare all these notes and really see, like, it's the medical system that needs to be overthrown. It can't be adjusted here and there with little bits of guidelines. It really needs to be overthrown. And I was wondering, why are we so bad at seeing our struggle in each other? Why can we not see that the struggle of an intersex person stems from the root of the struggle for so many different issues that we're all faced with? I have no one in particular, but if anybody would like to speak on that, maybe Sam, if you have anything about the kind of HIV aspect, Charlotte, I'm sure you know a lot about medical ARG, that's why I'm going to call it medical ARG, yeah, just because we were on the kind of medical thing with you being so open and honest, just with your own personal struggles. So yeah, I'm just going to set that down and leave that there for y'all. Someone take
Gosh,
something.
a lot there. There's quite a bit in this. God, it's a wild. It's the medical profession is a wild, wild west for LGBTQI plus people and fat people. We've all been mistreated at some stage by it. It's insane. As to why we're so bad at coming together and sharing notes, I think that there's this. Look, I can speak for like gay men. There's this strata whereby, particularly with like cis gay men, we're always trying to be one up and one above each other, and we hate communicating downwards. And like gay men in particular see themselves through ways, and because it's part of the way that they're treated and they're uplifted in media, particularly in the modern context. And seen as perhaps, well, definitely the most accepted of all of them, the most easily digestible by the heteronormative mainstream, that they kind of sit on top of this pile of privilege at the minute, particularly white gay men. And so we hate that idea of like filtering downwards and connecting and sharing the struggle, I think. Here in Ireland, we only got PrEP access, I think, late last year, which is while before that people would have to have it shipped in, and it costs hundreds and hundreds of euro to get it. And before that, you just couldn't find it. You had to have kind of like a black market dealer. You had to go up to the north and somehow get prescribed it there. And then you'd have to make I had a friend who was making a monthly trip up and down to Belfast to get his PrEP. And so I think it's this idea that we are so bad at it from a cis gay male perspective, because we just like to sit on top And that's wild to me. Like, our struggle is replicated again and again and again, all the way down through our entire community, no matter the body size, no matter the color of our skin, no matter our sexuality, no matter our gender orientation. And I think we have the power to change it. I hope, my God, we have the power to change it, because, as you said, it's not, like, the problem isn't us. You know, that's the case. The problem isn't us. The problem is the medical system. And the problem is that, you know, I was thinking about this when I saw this question. I've only been for one STI test where I wasn't recommended to lose weight. And that was one that I paid for with a private doctor who was getting €100 of my money. So, like, of course he wasn't. He wants my service back. Like, that's understandable. So I just really think, you know, I think that we've lost, because we, the cis gay male community, have kind of been summarily shit to everyone beneath us for a number of years. I think that there's not a lot of trust there. And, you know, it's up to us as a community to earn that trust back and to start that knowledge sharing system again, and to actually talk about it. I think, you know, there's plenty of stuff going around online and on socials where it's engaged, but, you know, it's just about gay men. And I think that we need to see that this is a system that hurts all of us, no matter what we need from a medical system. And certainly for fat bodies, I just want the medical system to just stop talking about it like it's a horrible thing. You know what I mean? That's all I want, is just to be able to go and make sure I don't have chlamydia without someone being like, bit chubby, Samuel. You know what I mean? Like, that's all I want. So yeah, I suppose that's my 2 cents. I'm not a doctor.
Good.
But yeah, but I think we just need to open that gate and do better by everyone else in our community. Really, that's my 2 cents.
I would go as far to say is, like, all doctors are bastards. You know, I'm so frustrated with the medical field as it is, you know, particularly knowing how my intersex siblings have suffered. Charlotte, I'd love you to come in on this kind of medical aspect, if you could.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the reason we can't see or connect with each other's common interests is about power and stratification. And I think for fat people as well, you know, we're not seen as agentic. We're ridiculed. We're not seen as sort of real. You know, I go back to the fat underground, that our problems are seen as health problems and not political problems. It reminds me, so in 2012, I organised a thing called the Fat Olympics here in East London. So I live in the shadow of the Olympic Stadium, and the Olympics was a complete nightmare. And I know that I'm one of many people in countries and cities where there have been Olympics to sort of talk about this. And so we organised this event to be well, like a piss take, really, the Olympics, because we hated it so much. But also it had lots of different layers to it. And we invited some real activists to come and support us, but nobody did. And they didn't see us as having any legitimacy at all. Yeah, and I think, yeah, it's a real shame. And there's great problem in the left in the UK. There are terrible problems with fat phobia. Yeah, I just think it's very hard for fat people to be seen as having legitimate cause or interests that are in common with other people's interests. Yeah.
I feel like there's a kind of a commonality in the discrimination towards fat people that is also kind of felt by bisexual people and also kind of felt by non-binary people, in that it is seen as a transient state that will
Yes.
and should change, you know, soon, ideally. And I know as a bisexual person, I've always felt that I've been out as bisexual since the age of 9. That's when I first said it, because there's not a lot of filter between the brain and the mouth with me. It's all kind of one. And, you know, I feel like it is just like, people are just like a little disappointed, you know, they're, oh, just bi, you know, and I feel like I get that same thing, like with my non-binary friends, non-binary? fat, you know, and like this should and would change, you know. And I was wondering, the non-binary folks on the panel, do you feel like your non-binary specific identity intersects with your fatness?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I don't know about you, Maya, but I feel like I feel like I'm like my fatness, like I almost feel like it's a gender in and of itself, because it informs so much of how the gender of my body is perceived, and within like both acceptableness and like unacceptableness, and also it's this dichotomy too of sort of hyper visibility and invisibility, right? Like I am hyper visible as a fat person, I'm hyper visible as a person who's gender non-conforming, but it's almost like my non-binariness is also sort of invisible to people when they first perceive me, because they're not, because non-binary in and of itself is you know, is not strictly defined. That is, you know, it's more defined by what it isn't. And you know, the same thing with fatness, like there's almost like this this desire to look away.
I absolutely agree. And I really appreciate you saying that your fatness feels gendered. For me, in many ways, I feel like my non-binary identity is often invalidated or just completely ignored, in part because I am fat. And I think in many ways, fatness is feminized. And because I'm not masculine, I identify as like femme-aligned, often people just like completely disregard like my non-binary identity and sort of identify me as like a woman light, whatever.
Oh, woman light, that's such a good term. No, but that hits the nail on the head perfectly. Like
exactly. That's how it feels. And I think in many ways, non-binary identities have been positioned as being androgynous in like the mainstream ideal. And androgyny is usually white, it's usually thin, usually masculine, honestly. And so if you don't fit any of that, which I definitely don't, it's like, how can you be non-binary? You don't fit my ideal of what a non-binary person should look like. So I'm just gonna completely invalidate you. Yeah, and I feel like it's so fat phobic, the ways in which non-binary fat people are just completely disregarded and tried to like fit back on the two gender binary, simply because in thin people's, or just like in general, people's imaginations of gender are so limited by fat phobia, transphobia, etc.
Oh, big time. And I was gonna say, Samuel, like I'd be interested to hear sort of your experience too, because I think especially for gay men who are fat, I think there is this like hyper feminization that kind of happens, that even though they would not identify necessarily as trans, I think is sort of part of the spectrum of transphobia, because it's like your body is presenting in a way that we associate as being not aligned with what we assume your gender is. You know, so we're going to make fun of your man boobs or whatever. And I'm like, what? You know, everybody can have boobs. We're mammals. That's just like physiologically how we work, you know? But yeah, I'd be very interested, because yeah, it's, fatness and gender is like such a huge, yeah, it's such a huge and interesting sort of subsection of fat phobia and of transphobia that I find fascinating.
I like absolutely agree with you. I think so much fat phobia in the cis gay male community is about emasculation. You know, there's this idea that kind of like softer bodies are more feminine, and that, you know, like you said, like terms like man boobs, the one that gets me is, what is it, straight, thin, gay, fat? Like, you know, it's this idea that like, you know, you would be acceptable if you were straight, but like because you are gay, like it's this whole thing. And I think a lot of the problem with cis gay men is this constantly trying to emulate that like hyper masculine, you know, super ripped or like very slender, like, you know, archetype of the male body. and to posit yourself against that, to either, you know, have a body that is opposite, or even worse, be happy having a body that is opposite. It's this kind of like this blemish across the desire for gay men to present masculine. And I think a lot of that comes down to, you know, we're trying to live up to, you know, we were obviously degraded and bullied a lot because of either an inherent or a perceived femininity for being gay men when we were younger. And the need to have these hypermasculine, super sculpted bodies is to kind of like prove that that's not the case. And then otherwise to, you know, degrade people who don't have that. There was a really good study by the APA, which actually stated that gay men don't just have, I think it was like triple the anti-fat bias that their straight peers had, they also expect other people in their social groups to have that as well. Which is like, that's real messed up. Like, we're not just body shaming, we expect the people around us to body shame as well. And there's this weird Venn diagram of like, you know, there's like gay, and then there's fat, and then there's camp or feminine. And if you're in the middle, God bless you. And God bless you if there's more layers on that. Like if you're a Black person, if you're a trans person, like, oh my God, I can't even imagine. Like existing on Grindr for 5 minutes without a six-pack is like exhausting. Like, I'm not on Grindr anymore, obviously. I have a beautiful boyfriend who's sitting just off screen. But like, you know, like, I could see him give me a look. I was like, no, like, you don't worry. But like, yeah, so yeah, I think it's all about emasculation. You know, it's this othering, this, you know, this pushing, this anti-femininity onto, like, internalizing this anti-femininity and pushing it onto other people who you perceive as less than.
And I kind of had a follow-up question to that. I'm not taking over the panel, I promise. But it's very interesting, like, this whole conversation, because, you know, my perspective, you know, as a non-binary person is one thing, but I was going to say to Bella and to Charlotte too, like, I feel like, you know, you have this one extreme for gay men where it's like, oh, you know, it's hyper feminization, it's very like you said, sort of like falling into this camp, it's very undesirable. But I feel like sometimes for people who for women and for people who identify as more femme, you know, and Maya, yourself as well, like sort of identifying as like more perhaps on the femme spectrum of gender presentation, I feel like fatness does sort of the opposite thing, where there's sort of this like, you know, if you're fat, you're not a woman sort of thing. So I'd be very interested to sort of hear about that too, because I think that like all of this is, like I said, you know, like falls within this spectrum of transphobia and like fat phobia that I don't even know if it's a Venn diagram so much as two circles on top of each other, but it's very fascinating.
That was exactly what I was going to say. It's so interesting hearing, you know, you talk about fat being feminine, and then you kind of, you know, people assuming a gender identity on top of you because of your fatness, where I feel I am robbed of my femininity because of my fatness. I'm a cis woman, but my God, am I into being a woman. Like, I am so into it. Like, my gender identity is extremely strong. I absolutely love being a woman. I feel more of a connection with the women around the world than I do with, say, Irish men, you know. So I'm a woman first before I'm a fat woman first, because again, my gender and my fatness have intersected. But I feel like my largeness, I also like quite a broad back, and I have big feet, and I'm kind of tall, you know, has absolutely robbed me of my ability to identify as a woman. And it's just so funny. It's like, no matter which way you look at it, fat is wrong, you know, and that's what society has put on you. I know, Charlotte, you've described yourself as a somewhat femme person at times. Have you had a similar experience where your femininity has felt lessened by being fat?
You know, I've no idea. I mean, I just want to sort of support what you're saying. You know, I think there's a gendered oppression around the way that fat phobia is mobilized, and I think it affects people of all genders actually, and that the idea that, you know, fat feminizes you or it masculinizes you. You know, many of us feel pain around that. And what have I experienced personally? Well, always just too big, too much, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. For me, I always felt too much. You know, I exist too much, and I'm also kind of like enthusiastic and loud. And recently, I found out that I snore really loudly, and that has like deeply upset me in a way that I don't think it would a skinny person. I'm like, oh, I can't even be quiet when I sleep. I'm just like this big hippo of a person. But then I have to remember that I absolutely adore hippos and I think they're majestic. So there's that as well. I wanted to ask you, Charlotte, is that I think there's kind of, you know, there's always this idea that there's a linear progression of most social concepts. You know, there used to be like, so what I try to do when I educate people about LGBT identities is explain to them that we didn't have two genders and then suddenly loads of genders. That's not what happened. We actually had in indigenous people all around the world, say the Fafains in Thailand, the Hijra in Southeast Asia, you know, people, indigenous people in North America and Canada, particularly Canada, and then colonialism actively targeted that. So it's gone like this. And I was wondering, from a fat visibility point of view, I feel like this has really increased and decreased. And there is this kind of idea that before in Western culture, fatness was more celebrated. You see kind of curvy women in old timey art. And I was wondering, what do you think in terms of the timeline we're on? Are we in a good place to be fat or a terrible place to be fat?
Okay. Well, the figure that's very important to me is the Venus of people say Willendorf, don't they? I say Willendorf because I'm a milquetoast Londoner, but and this figure is so important to me. And there are many Venus sculptures, and she's 30,000 years old. And 30,000 years ago, somebody knew what probably a fat black woman looked like, which I find an extremely powerful idea because it does show to me that fat isn't like a modern scourge, which is painted as through obesity discourse following the World Health Organization report on obesity that was published in 2000, which accelerated fat phobia into sort of government policy. So I find the Venus an extreme, and the other Venuses as well, extremely powerful figures to remind me that fat people are part of the fabric of humanity, that some of the earliest sculptures of people are fat people, and fat women, and probably fat black women as well. But whether we're at a good or a bad place, I think we're just at a place, actually. And I'm very cautious about the ways that fat is historicized. And by historicizing, I mean the way that we think about the past. There's a great temptation, and throughout the 80s and 90s, possibly from some of the books that I showed you, that there's a longing, I think, in fat people to think that, well, it can't always have been like this. It must have been different. And a longing that, you know, in different places, it has to be different. But I would really caution against that kind of flattening of the past and of elsewhere, because everywhere is complicated. Everywhere has a zillion sort of stories and ways of seeing and ways of experiencing, and I think it really depends on who you're looking at and who you're talking about, and the way that you're talking about it too. So I can't really tell you if it were a good place or a bad place. I mean, as I said earlier, it's thrilling to me that we're having this conversation, and that you, Bella, are using this term coming out as fat, which is a term that, you know, I wrote about 20 years ago now. You know, that's totally exciting that that amount of change can happen, you know, well within my lifetime. But yeah, things are also pretty grim. The current war on obesity is totally depressing. I don't see fat phobia going away anytime soon, and these kind of misreadings of different groups who experience similar oppressions but from different angles, and the lack of unity around that, and the sort of the power games that people play. I mean, that's really grim. I guess there's still a lot of work to do. Will the work ever be over? I doubt it. And in fact, in many ways, I wouldn't want it to be over, because the struggle is also life. But yeah, I don't know. I just, good or bad, it's just too simplistic. It's for extremely complicated things. It's good for some people, it's terrible for others, is probably what I want to say.
Yeah, so we're in a place. I think that's a good summation. Thank you so much for the term coming out as fat, because I found extremely liberating for myself to be able to frame it in that way. I'm going to just now ask anybody who wants to say, again, this is, I guess, personal. What's your favorite thing about being fat? And you don't have to answer, obviously, if you don't want to, but I will say mine. And mine is that I am not plagued with the worry about what if I get fat, which nearly every one of my straight size friends are worried about it. And I am just in a life free from that worry, because I am fat. And you don't have to, you don't have to worry about getting fat if you stay fat. That's a life hack right there. So I think being freed of that is a burden that has actually left me with a lot of time to read a lot of books and watch a lot of movies and cook a lot of food, and not worry, and listen to my body in a way that people worried about getting fat can't do. I listen to my body constantly, and I have a really good relationship with my body in a way that I don't think you can if it's conditional on you being thin. So that's mine, and I would love if anybody else wants to share their favorite thing about being fat.
I think we're all maybe being a little bit polite, so I'll happily go next. Like I said, I'm really glad you asked this question, because, like I said, I'm on this journey to wider acceptance of my body. I'm going through quite a tough body time at the minute. It's kind of like an up and down for me. It's this constant wave of being I'm amazing, and then the next day being oh my God, I hate everything. So this really forced me to sit and reflect, and be kind to myself a little while, which is something my boyfriend has been telling me to do for a while, and I find it quite hard at times. So for me, being fat, I'm also 6'4", which you obviously can't get from a Zoom call. I'm very broad, I'm quite large. And my favorite thing is that everyone sits up and notices when I walk into a room. I stand out to everyone. And that's great, because A, I do love attention, and B, I also like to be, I don't want to be the center of attention, but I do love to kind of have people gravitate around me. I love to host, I love to look after people, and I like to help people be themselves and to feel comfortable. And so I don't think I would be able to do that if I was smaller and more diminutive and petite. So yeah, it's helped me kind of I think my size reflects my personality, and I think that is I like my personality and I like my size as a result. So yeah, I think they go hand in hand really, really well.
I think my favorite thing about being fat is just how much space I take up. I just love the ways in which my fatness opens up the realms of abundance, because we live in a white, cis, heteropatriarchal, capitalist world that is rooted in a scarcity model of we don't have enough. And so I think in many ways fatness exists in resistance to this idea of scarcity, that the future can be abundant, we have everything that we need. We have all the tools we need. So yeah, I look at the ways in which my fatness is infinite possibilities. I love that.
I was gonna say, what I love about being fat is there's two things I would think. The first thing is the softness of my body is just especially because I don't know, there's something very comforting in that, I also, when I date, tend to date other fat trans people, and there is this sense of intimacy, I think, that comes from like two people of size, you know, being like close to each other, and the way that like your bellies feel rubbing together. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. I think that that is a really beautiful, unique experience. And then the other thing I really love about being fat is that despite the fact that I don't live in my home territory, despite the fact that you know, I have in some ways kind of a difficult relationship with my biological family, I look like my ancestors. And both on like the settler white part of my family and the indigenous part of my family. And more than anything else, that makes me feel very rooted. You know, when I am in community, when I am like on a reserve, I look like the people around me. And like, what a gift. Like, what a tremendous gift that is. Especially because, like, again, like as like a mixed race person, there's times when I definitely have not found that or have struggled with that sense of belonging, because of the way our bodies look, is like such a, I'm getting teared up. This is such a powerful thing. So that's something I love about being fat, is that it connects me to the people I come from. Yeah.
That's really beautiful. Thank you again for sharing. I never thought of that aspect. Yeah, I look like the farmers, my grandmother's grandmother who worked the land here in Ireland, you know, I look like them, and I have a broad back for carrying things. Yeah, okay. Charlotte, do you want to answer?
Yeah, well, I come from punk, and I'm a revolutionary. I really enjoy being a threat to the social order. I love being dangerous. I love being a problem. I love being a thorn in the side of normal, polite society. I'm part of a movement to topple current iterations of stinking power. That's what I like most about being fat.
Amazing. Okay, so thank you so much, everybody. What I want to just do is go through the panel again. If you have anything you want to plug, or your social media, if you want to say it, or just any final thoughts before we sign off. But I do want to say that this was, I was so nervous. I mean, I was so nervous today, and this has just gone so nice. I have such a warm, fuzzy feeling. I'm 100% going to order takeout tonight and eat it with abundance. I can't wait. It's going to be so good. So I'm going to go through my Brady Bunch boxes again. So Jess, any plugs or final thoughts?
So first of all, I wanted to say a huge thank you to you and to the other panelists today. This has been so lovely and so life-giving in a week when I really feel like I've needed it. And I would say that if people want to follow me and figure out and find out what I'm doing, they can follow me on Instagram at _rad_babe. I think there's like 3 of them in there. Anyway, at radbabe, you can find me. And I talk a lot about, you know, queer stuff and native stuff and fat stuff. So yeah, that's the best way to check me out. Thank you again to all of you.
Thank you, Jess.
That's it.
My plug would just be for shout out. We do a lot of school work, and we're currently selling t-shirts that say protect queer youth. So if you have any spare coins and you want to buy a t-shirt, I will be packing it personally myself, because there's only 2 members of staff in the whole organization. So yeah, that's fun. Charlotte, any final thoughts or anything you'd like to plug?
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. There's a new edition of Fat Activism coming out in the spring that's going to have a whopping 5,000 word preface to it, so all new stuff. You can find me online fairly easily. charlottecooper.net is my main website. There's loads of stuff on there, things to download, free stuff, zines, all kinds of shit. And yeah, that's what I'm going to say.
Amazing. Maya, final thoughts?
Thank you all so much. I really enjoyed just being in conversation with each and every one of you. Thank you so much, Bella, for inviting me to speak on this panel. It's amazing. Yeah, there's fat people in the future, there's fat Black people in the future. Like that's sort of what I hold on to. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, at SavageXFatty. I just chat about like the intersections between fatness, Blackness, abolition, queerness, being non-binary, all those things. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Maya. Sam, anything to plug?
I have nothing to plug, but I just wanted to say thank you all so much. Thank you for having me on this panel, Bella. Thank you for organizing it. And this has been really affirming. I've been close to tears a number of times through this, which is like quite uncommon for me, but like it's been a joy and a privilege to listen to you all, and thank you so much. If you want to follow me, I'm at Sam What Is Life on every platform. I cook, I try and be funny online, I love to chat, I'm trying to get a book published, so everything helps.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam. Ruben, do you want to plug anything from Iglio?
Yeah, actually, I was here all the time. I was kind of applauding and you got to tear up sometimes. So really, like, thank you. No, we're going to continue. This is pre-recorded and we're going to continue with different panels today here. But no, just to say thank you very much. I think that everyone hearing you, like, will have learned a lot. I think that this is like very sensitive for many people, and all of the things that you were discussing like was super interesting and delightful, and so really thank you for being here again. Like I was here like applauding and crying really, and I'm pretty sure that everyone like watching us right now will be pretty much in the same situation, so really thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruben, for having us.